The battlefield was silent, but the silence was not peaceful. Smoke still rose from broken machines, their metal frames glowing with heat where fire had licked them only hours before. Bodies lay scattered across the field, human and alien alike, a grim reminder of how cruel the war had become. The ground was soaked with dark stains, the air filled with the sharp smell of burned oil and blood. Every step crunched on shattered armor and broken glass, and yet in all this destruction, one faint sound cut through, the uneven breath of someone still alive. She lay half-buried beneath the twisted wreckage of her own people's warship, her silver armor torn apart, her skin pale beneath streaks of blood and dust. Her crown broken into 2 pieces rested near her hand. She was not just any soldier. She was the alien princess, heir to her throne, once carried into battle with banners of glory. Now she was a shadow of that image, abandoned by those who had sworn to protect her. Her people had decided she was no longer worth saving. They had left her behind when retreat was called. Her wounds too severe, her body too heavy to carry. Betrayal burned deeper than the pain of her injuries. Her lips moved weakly, whispering words no one could hear. A figure appeared in the distance, moving slowly through the wreckage, his boots pressed into the ruined ground with careful steps, his eyes scanning for supplies. He was human, his uniform torn and patched from too many battles, his rifle slung across his back. He was not here to fight. The war had already ended in this place. He was only a scavenger now, searching for anything that might keep him alive one more day. He did not expect to find life among the dead. When his eyes fell on her, he froze. For a moment he thought it was only another corpse, but then he saw her chest rise, shallow and weak. His heart pounded as he realized who she was. Even in her broken state, her face was known across the galaxy. He had seen her image before on propaganda screens in enemy broadcasts. She was supposed to be a symbol of strength, a leader that rallied her people to war against humanity, and now she lay in the dirt, discarded like nothing. He gripped the strap of his rifle, his mind torn between instincts. Every soldier he had fought beside would tell him to leave her. She was the enemy, the reason so many of his kind had died. If he lifted her from that ground, he might be lifting death onto his own shoulders. Yet something in her broken form kept him from turning away. The rise and fall of her chest was proof of a life hanging by a thin thread. His jaw tightened as he looked around, half expecting her soldiers to return at any moment. But no one came. The battlefield was truly abandoned. The human stepped closer, his breath slow and careful. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of his boots. They were dim, unfocused at first, but when they settled on his face, a flicker of recognition appeared. Fear followed quickly after. Her people had taught her that humans were ruthless, brutal, unworthy of mercy. She tried to move, to lift her hand, but her body failed her. The weight of her injuries held her down. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Enemy." He stared at her, unable to answer. Yes, he was her enemy. But what kind of enemy was she now? She was not holding a weapon. She was not commanding armies. She was simply dying, left to rot on a battlefield where even the flies had already begun to gather. He knelt down beside her, brushing away the debris that pinned her. His hands hesitated as he touched the broken plates of her armor. The heat of blood soaked into his fingers, and the reality of her condition struck him. She would not live much longer without help. A battle raged inside him, louder than the guns that had once echoed here. If he carried her, his own people might kill him for treachery. If he left her, his conscience might never let him rest again. He looked into her fading eyes and saw not a ruler, not an alien, not an enemy. He saw someone betrayed, someone fighting for one more breath. His heart hardened with a strange resolve. The wind picked up, blowing smoke across the ruined field. The human lifted her carefully, her body limp against his chest. Her crown fell away into the dirt, forgotten among the ashes of war. She tried to protest, her voice barely audible, but no strength followed her words. He carried her step by step through the wreckage, each movement heavy with the weight of a decision he could not take back. Behind them, the battlefield remained still, the fires burning lower, the dead untouched. Ahead of them lay only uncertainty. He did not know why he was doing this. He did not know if he would regret it tomorrow. All he knew was that he could not leave her to die alone in the ruins of betrayal. His people would call it weakness. Her people would call it madness. But in that moment, carrying her through the smoke, it felt like the only human choice left to make. The silence of the battlefield grew louder with every step he took, as if the ghosts of the dead were watching him. The human soldier did not look back. He held the alien princess tighter, knowing that both their fates had already changed forever. The war might have abandoned her, but he would not. And in that fragile decision, something far greater than survival had begun. The shelter he found was nothing more than the broken shell of a transport bay carved into the hillside. Once it had been used to load cargo ships and supplies, but now the ceiling sagged in places and the floor was scattered with rusting crates. The human moved quickly, his arms trembling from the weight of carrying her across the ruins. He lowered her gently onto an old metal pallet and leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling heavily. For a moment he only stared at her, unsure if he had made a mistake that would cost him his life. The alien princess stirred weakly, her body trembling as the cold air seeped into her wounds. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes opened enough to catch sight of him. Even in pain, even betrayed, her stare carried the faint authority of someone born to rule. Her lips parted and she managed a faint whisper. "Why did you not leave me?" The human did not answer right away. He crouched beside her, removing his pack and pulling out the few supplies he had salvaged. Bandages, a half-empty water flask, and a small torchlight. His hands were not trained for this kind of healing, yet he had seen enough injuries to know that doing nothing would kill her faster. He poured water carefully across a long gash in her side and she flinched, gasping in pain. "You need to stay still," he muttered, his voice rough but not unkind. Her gaze did not leave him. She studied his face as if searching for the cruelty her people had always warned her about. Instead, she saw lines of exhaustion, a scar along his jaw and eyes that carried both suspicion and something she did not expect. Hesitation. She wanted to believe this was a trick, that he was keeping her alive for ransom or interrogation, but the way his hands shook as he wrapped her wounds betrayed something else. He was not acting like a soldier following orders. He was acting like a man caught in a choice he did not fully understand. At last he spoke. "I should have left you there. Every reason tells me I should have, but I could not." The princess closed her eyes for a moment, her strength fading again. His words echoed in her mind, clashing against memories of her council abandoning her, of generals dismissing her cries for mercy. She had been told her people would never abandon their royal blood. Yet here she was, alive only because an enemy refused to do what her own soldiers had done so easily. As night fell, the bay grew colder, the darkness pressing in from every crack. The human lit his torch, its dim glow casting long shadows across the walls. He leaned back against a crate, his rifle resting across his knees, always ready in case patrols passed nearby. The princess coughed softly, her voice carrying just enough for him to hear. "Your people will kill you for this." He turned his head slowly toward her. "Maybe, but if I left you, I would never forgive myself. That is worse." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. No warrior she had known had ever spoken so simply, so openly, not even those who once swore loyalty to her. She wanted to argue, to remind him that she was his enemy, that saving her made no sense, yet the words stayed unspoken. Deep inside, a seed of something unfamiliar began to grow, confusion mixed with gratitude. Time moved slowly in the shelter. Outside, the faint sound of engines hummed in the distance, patrols scouring the wreckage for survivors. Each noise made him tense, his hand tightening on the rifle. Every time, silence returned and he breathed again. She watched him from where she lay, realizing that his fear was not only for himself. He was afraid of being discovered with her. Her voice broke the silence once more. "What is your name, human?" He hesitated. Names were power, and giving one to the enemy was a risk. Yet he found himself answering quietly, "Elias." She let the sound linger in her thoughts, whispering it back softly, "Elias." It felt strange on her tongue, yet it grounded her, gave her something human to hold on to in this blur of pain. For the first time since being abandoned, she felt less like a dying relic and more like someone who still mattered. Hours passed. Elias forced himself to stay awake, though his body begged for rest. He checked her bandages, offering her water in small sips. Each time her hand brushed his, her eyes flicked to his face as if still trying to solve the puzzle of why he had done this. She was used to betrayal, not mercy. She was used to commands, not choices. At last, she whispered, "You risk everything for me. Do not pretend you do not know what will happen if they find us together." Elias's expression hardened, though his voice remained steady. "Then let them find us. But not tonight. Her heart pounded faintly, not from fear but from something she had not expected to feel toward a human. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her back into sleep. But before darkness claimed her, one final thought burned in her mind. The galaxy was vast, yet in all its stars she had never imagined that her survival would rest in the hands of her enemy. Elias sat in silence, listening to her breathing steady. He looked at the shadows crawling across the walls and tightened his grip on the rifle. He had made his choice. Tomorrow might bring hunters, soldiers, and accusations, but for tonight, the fragile secret between a human soldier and an alien princess was safe inside a broken shelter, and though he could not admit it to himself yet, he knew that saving her had already changed the course of his fate. The dawn came slowly, a pale light seeping through cracks in the ruined bay. Dust motes floated in the air, and the distant sound of engines still hummed across the dead fields. Elias opened his eyes to the cold weight of uncertainty pressing on his chest. He had barely slept, his back aching from leaning against the metal crate, his rifle always within reach. His first glance was toward her. The princess was still alive. Her breathing was shallow, her skin paler than before, but her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. The bandages he had wrapped were stained dark, but they had held through the night. For a brief moment, relief washed through him, but it was quickly chased away by the harsh truth. Every hour she lived made the risk greater. If she died, at least his burden would end. If she lived, he would have to carry her deeper into danger. Her eyes fluttered open. For a heartbeat, they looked unfocused, lost somewhere far away. Then they fixed on him. "You are still here," she whispered, her voice cracked but laced with quiet surprise. Elias shrugged, keeping his face calm though his mind churned. "I told you I would not leave you." The princess tried to shift, pain flashing across her face as she did. "My people left me," she said bitterly, as if reminding herself more than him. Her words echoed inside the hollow chamber, heavy with the sting of betrayal. "But you, a human, stayed." He studied her for a long moment. Her silver hair, tangled and dirt-streaked, still held a faint shimmer. Her alien armor, though broken, showed signs of the grandeur she once carried. She was not just a soldier or a casualty. She was something far more dangerous, an heir with secrets. "What happened?" Elias asked finally. "Why did they abandon you?" The princess closed her eyes as though searching for the strength to answer. When she spoke again, her voice was low and measured. "I was a symbol to them, a face for their war. But symbols are only useful when they inspire fear or hope. When I was wounded, I became weakness. And weakness cannot sit on a throne." Her lips tightened, her breath catching. The council decided my death would serve them better than my survival. Her words struck him harder than he expected. He had seen betrayal before, soldiers left behind when battles turned hopeless, but this was different. To abandon a princess, their future queen, was more than strategy. It was cruelty painted as politics. He looked at her and saw not the image of a mighty enemy, but a person stripped of worth by her own blood. Silence stretched between them until she added, "You cannot trust them, Elias. They will come for me, not to rescue me, but to finish what they started." His grip on the rifle tightened. He had already guessed as much. But hearing her say it brought the truth closer. If she was right, then every shadow outside could hide assassins. Every noise could be her own people hunting her down. And if they caught her with him, both of them would end the same way. As hours passed, the bay grew restless with sounds. Boots crunched in the distance. Engines roared closer, then faded away. Elias kept her hidden in the darkest corner, listening, waiting, his body tense like a coiled spring. Each time the sounds drew near, he pressed a finger to his lips and she obeyed, her breathing shallow with fear. In those moments, she saw the human not as a scavenger or soldier, but as a shield, someone who carried her survival on his shoulders with a stubbornness she did not understand. When the danger eased, her voice returned in whispers. "Why are you truly doing this?" Elias did not look at her. He stared at the floor, at the dust between the cracks. "Because no one deserves to be left to die alone, not even an enemy." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for the lie, but there was none. His words were simple, yet they struck deeper than speeches filled with honor or loyalty. Something stirred inside her, something she had not felt since before the war, a faint warmth in the shadow of betrayal. Night fell again, colder than before. The princess's strength weakened, and Elias found himself kneeling by her side more often, checking her pulse, forcing her to drink water in small sips. His rough hands, scarred from years of battle, moved with surprising care as he adjusted her bandages. Each touch carried no cruelty, only an unspoken promise that she was not alone. At one point, when the wind howled through the cracks and she shivered, Elias slipped off his worn jacket and laid it over her. She protested faintly, her pride flaring even in weakness. "You will freeze without it." "I've endured worse," he replied, settling against the wall once more. "You need it more than I do." She stared at him, the dim torchlight flickering across his face. In her heart, a dangerous thought grew, that perhaps the galaxy had lied to her. Perhaps humans were not the monsters her council had painted them to be. Perhaps mercy could exist even in the hands of her enemy. Her eyes closed, exhaustion pulling her toward sleep again. Yet before darkness claimed her, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "You should not be here, but I am glad you are." Elias turned his head, watching her fragile form beneath his jacket. He said nothing, but deep inside, the weight of his choice grew heavier. He knew she was right. He should not be here. He should not care whether she lived or died. But he did. And as shadows stretched across the broken bay, Elias realized the truth he had been avoiding since the moment he found her. This was no longer about war or survival. It was about a decision that tied their fates together, a secret hidden in the ruins that would soon come to light. The night deepened, and in the silence, two enemies lay side by side in a shelter of shadows, bound not by loyalty, but by the fragile thread of a human choice that refused to break. The third night in the shelter brought no peace. The air was heavy, carrying the metallic scent of burned machines from the battlefield. The torchlight had burned low, casting only a faint glow against the broken walls. Elias kept his rifle across his knees, his ears straining for the faintest sign of movement outside. The princess slept fitfully beside him, her breath shallow, her face pale in the dim light. He wondered if she would live to see the next sunrise. It was in that silence that the danger arrived. The crunch of boots echoed faintly through the ruins, steady and purposeful. Elias stiffened, pressing himself against the wall. He listened, his heart pounding with each step that drew closer. This was no scavenger searching for scraps. These were soldiers, trained, armed, and hunting. The princess stirred as though sensing it too. Her eyes fluttered open, and in their dim glow he saw the fear flash through them. She opened her mouth, but Elias pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. The footsteps grew louder, shadows shifting against the cracked entrance of the bay. Voices carried through the night, low and sharp, speaking in her language. Elias understood none of the words, but he recognized the tone. It was not rescue. It was pursuit. The princess gripped the edge of the pallet, her strength barely enough to hold her up. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "They are here for me. They will kill us both." Elias's jaw clenched. He had known this moment would come, but knowing did not make the fear any less. He scanned the bay quickly, his eyes landing on the broken ventilation shaft near the far wall. Narrow, filled with rust, but it led into the hillside. It was their only chance. He moved quickly, pulling her arm over his shoulder. Her body was weak and trembling, but she forced herself to stand with his help. Each step toward the shaft was heavy, her breath ragged with pain. Behind them, the voices grew louder. A beam of light swept across the bay entrance, searching. Elias's heart pounded like a drum as he pushed her toward the opening. The shaft was small, the metal edges sharp. He shoved aside broken pipes and wires, creating just enough space for her to crawl inside. She turned to him, her face pale and desperate. "You cannot fight them alone," she whispered. "I am not planning to," Elias said, his voice steady but tight with urgency. "Go. Now." She hesitated only a moment longer before dragging herself into the narrow shaft, her body scraping against the rusted walls. Elias followed, pulling the metal cover back just as the soldiers entered the bay. Their lights cut through the dark, beams landing on the empty pallet. Voices rose sharply, angry and commanding. Elias crawled deeper into the shaft, his breathing rough, the sound of boots pounding against the floor echoing behind them. The shaft twisted and narrowed, forcing them to move slowly. The princess struggled, her body shaking from the effort, but Elias pushed her forward with quiet urgency. The clatter of soldiers moving above them rattled the metal walls. One wrong noise, and they would be discovered. Elias slowed his breathing, his eyes fixed on the faint light ahead. The shaft opened into the hillside, spilling them into the cold night air. They emerged onto a ridge overlooking the ruins. Below, patrol lights swept across the wreckage, beams crisscrossing as soldiers searched every shadow. The princess collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving, while Elias crouched beside her, his rifle ready. He scanned the horizon, his mind racing. They could not stay here. The soldiers would find their trail soon enough. "Get up," he whispered, his voice low but firm. She shook her head, her body trembling. I cannot move," he gritted his teeth. He knew she was close to breaking, but stopping now was death. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms again, her head resting weakly against his shoulder. She whispered something faintly in her language, words he did not understand. But the tone was soft, almost like gratitude. Elias carried her along the ridge, keeping low, his steps quiet. Every sound of the night felt amplified, the crunch of dirt beneath his boots, the faint rasp of her breathing, the distant shouts of soldiers. The hunt was on, and they were the prey. Hours passed in tense silence as he led them deeper into the hillside. The terrain grew harsh, jagged rocks rising like teeth around them. He found a narrow cave and slipped inside, lowering her gently against the wall. His muscles burned, his arms heavy, but he forced himself to stay alert. He peered out into the night, watching as light swept across the distance. They were searching methodically, and it would only be a matter of time before they reached this place. The princess opened her eyes, her voice faint but steady. "You risk your life for me again and again, why?" Elias looked at her, his expression hard but his voice quiet. "Because I cannot let them decide who deserves to live. Not when I am standing here." She studied him, her gaze softening. "My people would not understand you. They only see strength and cruelty, but you fight for something else." He said nothing, only checked the chamber of his rifle, the sound sharp in the silence. Yet her words lingered, digging into the parts of him he rarely let himself feel. The night dragged on, each hour heavier than the last. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, echoing through the jagged hills. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle, his mind cold and clear. The hunt was closing in. There would be no running forever. He knew it, and she knew it. In the shadows of that cave, with the enemy drawing nearer, Elias realized the truth. He had not just saved her. He had chosen her, and that choice meant they would face whatever came next together, even if it meant standing against both their worlds. The hunt was far from over. It had only just begun. The cave grew colder as the night stretched into dawn. A thin line of pale light crept across the jagged floor, chasing away the shadows, but it brought no comfort. Elias sat at the entrance, his rifle balanced on his lap, his eyes locked on the valley below. Patrols moved like ants across the ruins, methodical and relentless, sweeping each ridge as though the land itself was guilty of treachery. The princess rested against the wall behind him, her breath faint, her body frail but alive. He knew they would not last much longer like this. Every hour they remained in hiding, the search net closed tighter. They had been lucky to slip through the cracks once, but luck could not last forever. And when it ran out, the soldiers would not hesitate. She would be executed for treason against her own people. He would be shot as an enemy who dared to touch their future queen. The princess stirred, her voice a whisper in the stillness. "They will not stop. You know this." Elias did not look back at her. His eyes remained on the valley, on the light sweeping back and forth. "I know." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the wind whistling through the cave's narrow opening. At last she added, "You do not owe me anything. If you leave now, you may still live." Elias turned then, meeting her gaze. Her eyes, though weak, still carried the weight of someone who had once commanded armies. Yet beneath that strength he saw the cracks, the doubt, the fear, the quiet resignation of someone who expected betrayal again. His voice was calm but heavy with certainty. "I made my choice the moment I lifted you from that battlefield. I will not undo it now." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her eyes, unable to hold his gaze. The truth she had been fighting to deny settled inside her like a stone. He was not like her people. He would not abandon her. The day wore on and the sound of engines grew louder. Dust rose in the distance, signaling something larger than patrols. Elias narrowed his eyes. A command ship hovered over the valley, its dark silhouette blotting out the morning sun. Dropships broke away from it, descending in formation. Soldiers spilled out, spreading across the ridges with ruthless precision. This was no search party anymore. This was a purge. Elias's chest tightened. They were out of time. He turned back to her, his expression grim. We have to move. Now. The princess tried to rise, but her legs gave out beneath her. Elias caught her before she collapsed, his arms steady around her fragile frame. She looked up at him, frustration flashing in her eyes. I cannot fight like this. I will only slow you down. Then I'll carry you, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He lifted her once more, her weight pressing against him, and stepped out of the cave into the cold morning air. The valley stretched wide before them, enemy soldiers already spreading through its veins. Every step was a gamble, every breath a risk, but Elias pushed forward, his determination burning brighter than fear. They did not get far before the trap closed. A squad of alien soldiers emerged from the ridge ahead, their weapons raised, their eyes sharp and merciless. Behind them, more figures appeared, blocking the path. The circle tightened, cutting off escape from every side. Elias set the princess gently on her feet, his rifle snapping into position. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He knew he could not win this fight, but he would not lay down without trying. The lead soldier stepped forward, his voice cold as steel. The princess is to be taken alive. Kill the human. The princess's eyes widened. Her lips parted as though to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Elias moved in front of her, his body shielding hers. The soldier sneered. You would die for her? A traitor to your own kind? Elias's reply was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the morning air like a blade. If protecting her makes me a traitor, then so be it. Gunfire erupted. Elias dropped to one knee, returning fire with deadly precision. Each shot echoed across the valley, striking true, but there were too many. Bullets tore into the rocks around him, sparks flying. The princess crouched behind him, her weak hands gripping the remnants of her broken armor. For a moment it seemed certain he would fall beneath the storm. Then something within her snapped. A surge of strength she thought lost coursed through her veins. She rose shakily to her feet, her voice ringing out in her native tongue with a command that made the soldiers falter. For all their orders, for all their cruelty, they still recognized the blood of their princess. The hesitation was brief, but it was enough. Elias took advantage, driving them back with a volley of fire that scattered their formation. Smoke rose, shouts echoed, and in the chaos a dropship descended. This one marked not with the crest of the aliens, but with the battered insignia of the human resistance. The ramp lowered, human soldiers inside shouting for Elias to hurry. Relief flashed across his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came when he heard their words. Bring the human. Leave her. The princess froze, her eyes wide, staring at Elias. She could already see the choice forming in his mind. Elias stood silent for a long moment. The sound of enemy soldiers regrouping pressed against his ears. The ramp of the dropship waiting behind him. His people were calling for him. His survival laid out in front of him like an open hand. All he had to do was step away, but he turned to her instead. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his voice calm, unshaken. If she stays, I stay. The human soldiers shouted again, disbelief in their voices. But Elias did not move. His feet were planted firmly beside her, his rifle ready, his heart resolved. The dropship commander hesitated, the engines roaring as gunfire cracked across the valley. Then with a curse, the ramp lowered further. Both of you. Now!